astrology or how to read a chart, right? So this is what I want to take you through today, through a story. So just a heads up, I'm recording this webinar. So for those who can't attend or those who would like to watch this later, I'll put this up on YouTube and you can follow me there. Please subscribe, like, whatever, so you stay up to date with what I'm coming out with. I'm trying to make more webinars this time. Let's see how long I can keep up with it. But the intention is to make webinars in different topics in astrology or connected to astrology, right? And in all probability, the next webinar will be on astronomy, but I will let you know as soon as I decide the topic. So I'm going to share my screen now, and this should take us around about an hour or so, depending on how much interaction we have. I want to share my perspective on one story. I'm going to share the story with you, and then we'll unpack that story and look at the deeper meanings behind that story, right? And then we'll see how astrology comes into the grand scheme of things. Because it's a short webinar, we are not going to have a break or anything. So in case you want to get water or something like that, now's the time before we get started. Yeah. Any broad thoughts or questions you want to share before we start? Okay, then let me take you through something which I covered in the last webinar. Yeah, I covered the broad scale of the Hindu Vedic scriptures and how it has been grouped and classified by modern day scholars. Yeah. Now, you can see this more from the YouTube recording. This is already there on YouTube. But I want to show you where this webinar is going to go. Yeah. Now you see the circle over here. This is Jyotish, and Jyotish is astrology, and Jyotish Shastra is a science of light, and this is said to be a Vedanga. So if you see the branch here, it comes under Vedangas, and Vedanga is a limb of the Vedas. Yeah, that is many books, many texts, all are grouped under Jyotish over there. Right at the top there, you'll see another section called Puranas. Yeah? Puranas are different from the Itihasas, right? Itihasa translates to that which was, or something on those lines, yeah, that which happened. And the two major Itihasas or epics are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which we take it as it has happened. Next to Itihasa, modern day scholars have classified a whole bunch of writings, scriptures, as Puranas, which translates into stories, right? So you have the Vishnu Purana, the Garuda Purana, many different Puranas. I think there are 18 of them. And the story that I want to share today with you appears almost in both, right? There are different versions of the story mentioned in the Puranas and slightly different variations of the same story mentioned in both the Itihasas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, right? It is that important, this story. And I'm sure that all of you know the story, right? I have no doubt about it, that you know the story. But I'm going to share the story again based on how I remember my grandmother to have told the story. And then we'll see how it connects to astrology. Yeah. Any guesses which the story is? No. Okay. It is one of the classics of all stories, the foundations, almost the beginning story of everything that we do in astrology. And it is known as the Samudra Manthan. Yeah. It's the churning of the ocean. Yeah. But let's take a look at this from how I remember it. I'm sure you have different versions of it, but let's see where we go with this. Yeah. The story starts with a sage called Durvasa, yeah, an extremely accomplished sage called Durvasa, who happened to be in a forest as Indra, the king of the gods, was going through it. Yeah. And Indra, he's the king and he's riding a white elephant and he's passing by the forest. And Durvasa wants to pay his respects to Indra. So he gives them a garland. Right? And Indra is sitting on this large elephant right on the top. And Indra takes the garland and he puts it around the neck of the elephant. Right? Just like that, he says, this is a beautiful garland. I would like my elephant Airavat to carry the garland. Everything is fine, good and dandy, but the garland has very fragrant flowers which the bees get attracted to. So there are bees coming to this elephant and picking whatever the flowers and annoying the elephant. He gets super annoyed. He takes the garland and puts it down on the ground. Durvasa is shocked. How can this elephant throw my garland? And he curses Indra. Indra is the king of the gods. Durvasa is a sage. He curses Indra, says, you will lose all strength, all power, and you will start losing all battles. You have the devas, the gods, and you have the asuras, the demons. The gods have lost their strength now because of this curse. And all fighting ensues. And the devas and the asuras start to win. They start to win every battle. The demons start to take over. They start conquering lands and they're about to enter heaven where the devas reside. The devas start trembling. What do? Usually in all stories that I've read about Indra, he rushes to one of the three trinities. He goes to either Brahma, Vishnu, or Shiva. Right? This time, he decides to go to Vishnu. He says, help. What do we do? Because of what happened, we are losing our battles. What do we do? Help us out. Vishnu says, you need to be diplomatic with the asuras. You need to learn to negotiate with the demons. Promise them something. What can we give them? So Vishnu says, there is the ocean of milk. Churn it and tell the asuras, the demons, that there is nectar at the base of this ocean. The nectar of everlasting life. The Amrit. And the only way that we can bring that Amrit to the surface is if we work together and we churn this ocean. Yeah. So the devas go to the asuras and they share this with the asuras. And the asuras say, fine, we will help you provided we get our share of the Amrit. Vishnu says, we will give you the Amrit. But first we need to churn the ocean and retrieve this Amrit. Right? How do you churn an ocean? Right? It's not a small pot, it's an ocean. Now you need to churn it. You need to churn it like how we make buttermilk by churning it. You need to churn an ocean. What they decide is to lift a mountain called Mandara and to use that as the churning rod. Put it in the center of the ocean and let's say we churn that. We use that as the churning rod to churn this ocean of milk. Okay, great. So they try to take Mandara and lift Mandara off its base and put it in the ocean. all the devas, all the asuras, they come together to lift Mandara. The mountain, they're trying to lift a mountain so heavy that many of them, they fall, they die. Indra goes back to Vishnu. Help us lift Mandara and put Mandara in the ocean. Vishnu again comes now on Garuda, right? That's the mode of transport of Vishnu. So Garuda and Vishnu, they lift Mount Mandara and they place it in the ocean. First step accomplished. Now they need something to churn this ocean. What do? They ask Shiva and Vasuki, the king of serpents, to be used as a churning rope. And there's a huge story, there's a long story about why Vasuki agrees to be used in this churning. So Vasuki comes, the king of serpents, who sits around Shiva's neck, wraps itself around Mount Mandara, the tail on one side and the head on the other. Yeah? Now, all the devas go towards the head. They hold the head. The asuras, they are pissed off. Why should the devas go to the head? We want to be at the head. We don't want to hold the tail of the serpent. We want to be at the head. Fine. No? They swap sides. All the asuras are on the head side of the head. All the devas on the side of the tail. And they start to churn. They pull and push, right? They're pulling each one alternatively, and the Mount Mandara is turning back and forth, thereby churning the ocean. But the weight of this mountain is so large that even Vasuki can't hold the mountain in place. So it starts to sink. If the churning rod sinks, there's nothing. You can't continue. So again, both now this time, Devas and Asuras, they go back to Vishnu and they say, help. We need to hold Mount Mandara at the top in order to churn it. So what does Vishnu do? Takes the form of a giant turtle known as the Kurma avatar. Yeah? Submerges himself in the ocean and starts to support the mountain. And the churning continues. Right? Now, they're churning for the Amrit, they're churning for the nectar of immortality. But what rises first are all the poisons. This poison itself starts to destroy creation. Now, the Devas and the Asuras are terrified that they're not going to survive this. So this time they go to Shiva and they say, please help us deal with this poison. Shiva says, okay, no problem. I will consume the poison. You continue churning. So he takes all the poison that's emerging from the ocean, gulps it down, but holds it at his neck. He doesn't swallow it. And this poison is so strong that it starts to make his throat blue in color. But he's holding the poison. He's taking all the poison that's coming up, and the churning continues. Once the poisons finish, all the gems start to rise from the ocean. And these are known as ratnas in Sanskrit. Yeah? All kinds of ratnas start to emerge. First comes Lakshmi, goddess of wealth. And each of these ratnas that emerge, each of these gems is taken by a different world, by a different deity. So there is Kamadhenu which emerges. There is all the Apsaras emerge. Many beautiful elephants emerge, all kinds of gems, and precious things start to come up. Even Chandra, the moon, is supposed to have emerged from this churning. And the moon starts to reside on Shiva's head. Finally, after all these gems emerge, comes Dhanvantari, the doctor of the gods, holding a pot of Amrit. The Devas take it, and Vishnu starts to serve the Devas. He says, let me serve all the Devas first, and then I will serve the Asuras. Don't worry, I'm going to give you the Amrit. Let me go in line. So he's serving all the Devas this nectar of everlasting life. One of the Asuras understands, realizes that there's something fishy going on. He feels that Vishnu is not going to be serving any Amrit to the Asuras. So he disguises himself as a Deva and comes and stands in line. And his disguise is so powerful that even Vishnu gets deceived. He gives him the Amrit. This Asura, in the form of a Deva, takes the Amrit and he gulps it. He's about to swallow it when two other Devas realize this deception and they alert Vishnu. Vishnu takes his Sudarshan Chakra and he chops the head off. So the Amrit is at the throat when the head and the body get separated. The head goes in one direction and the body goes in another direction. And the story continues. This is the story. Yeah, exactly. This is the story of the Samudra Manthan. No? Did everyone know about this story, or was this new to anyone?
I didn't know it. I didn't know it fully. I'd heard of it, but I didn't know the whole story.
Yeah, there are variations of this story, but generally this is an extremely important story in astrology. And I've heard that this story also exists in other cultures. Yeah, different versions, different terminology, but it exists. So now what I'm going to do is go back to the story and look at the layers of meaning in this story. You see, for me, stories are a way of passing on a message, a value, a philosophy, a learning, but in a way that does not bore me, in a way that I can remember it for eons. I'll never forget a story. So if I can learn to understand what the story is trying to say, I can use the story as a pivot to access other realms, the deeper meanings of this, right? So I want to take you through how I have interpreted this story, right? And then we'll see the connection with astrology. The Devas and the Asuras. So, it is said that in Satya Yuga, the Devas and the Asuras, the good and the evil, resided in different worlds, in different lokas. So you have Narasimha avatar and you have Hiranyakashipu, right? They resided in different worlds and they fought a battle in one world, in Satya Yuga. In Treta Yuga, good and evil existed on the same planet, but in different paths. Yeah. So you have Rama and you have Ravana. Same planet, but far away. In Dwapara Yuga, good and evil existed in the same family. Right? You have the Pandavas and you have the Kauravas in the same family. So in Kali Yuga, it is said that good and evil exists in the same person. Right? So the Devas and the Asuras, for me, represent the good qualities, the divine qualities in us, and the Asuric, the demonic qualities in us. And what Vishnu is saying over here, the creator, the preserver, and here I'm referring to Mahavishnu, right? Not Vishnu as the Trinities, not Vishnu of the Puranas, but Vishnu as Mahavishnu. What Vishnu is saying is, you can find Amrit by churning the ocean of milk if you negotiate with the demonic qualities and you both work together. And you can find everlasting life. But what do we need to do? We need to churn that ocean of milk. Ocean represents emotions, right? And these emotions can be churned by the spine as the churning axis. Mount Mandara represents the spine for me. And the churning is the rising of the Kundalini. Yeah. Serpents represent transformation. Shiva also is the deity of transformation, death and rebirth. Shiva is the deity of death. But death, what exactly is death? It's something coming to an end so something else can begin. So it's transformation. And this serpent, Vasuki, which sits around Shiva's neck, is being used to raise the Kundalini, transforming my base vital emotions so that my Kundalini energy can rise. And with that comes all the poisons. We are not going to find everlasting life like that. We have to deal with the poisons, but then Shiva himself says, I will consume your poison. You continue doing your work of churning your emotions and removing any base poison so that Amrit can rise to the surface. But here again, we have Kurma avatar in the story, right? Vishnu supports the spine, supports this whole process of churning, supports this process of transformation by providing a base, by providing a solid support for an upright spine. Yeah. Mahavishnu is the Vishnu that takes the Dashavatar, right? He's considered as the one, right, who is the supreme, even more supreme than the trinities, right? The Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. He's the creator of the whole universe, cosmos. Yeah. There are many stories of Mahavishnu. We can take that up another time. Yeah? But coming back to the story. So after all the poisons emerge and are consumed and transformed by the Shiva energy in us, comes the gems. And this has been spoken about extensively by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. What gems you can achieve through your sadhana. Yeah? All kinds of divine gifts. Each of the ratnas represents something. Like Kamadhenu, for instance, is abundance. Right? Lakshmi is fertility. Right? Fortune. These are all gems that arise when we work on our base emotions by uniting the good and evil in us. And finally comes the Amrit, everlasting life. What gives us moksha in other terminology, right? Moksha is actually freedom, but here we are talking of everlasting life. But even the demonic qualities in us want to be everlasting. And when this process starts, sometimes a demonic quality in us disguises itself as a benefic, as a divine quality, and tries to be forever. For instance, for example, you know, I'm just thinking out loud. Say, for instance, if I say, I'm going to build temples, I'm such a great man. I'm going to build temples and worship the gods. I'm going to allow people to worship the gods. There is a demonic quality in me of the ego and pride, which is coming out as a devic, as a benefic, as a divine quality. Right? A demon is disguising itself as a deva and coming and standing in line to take the amrit. But that disguise is so powerful that even Vishnu gets deceived and serves the amrit. But there are two divine qualities in us that realizes this deception, right? It's the sun and the moon. Surya and Chandra realize this deception. And both of them play a very important role in Vedic astrology, the sun and the moon. And they alert Vishnu, saying, this is not a deva. And Vishnu chops the head off. What happens to that asura when the head gets severed from the body? The head goes in one direction and it becomes Rahu, the north node of the moon. And the body goes in another direction, becomes Ketu, the south node of the moon. And well, this becomes the starting point to understand what Rahu and Ketu represent in Vedic astrology. But over here in the story, there are so many different devas and asuras and deities that come into play. All the different planets of Vedic astrology find their place over here in one way or another. But not just that, each of these planets are associated with a different avatar of Vishnu, right? So we have the sun, which is associated with the Ram avatar. The moon is associated with Krishna. Yeah? We have Mars associated with Narsimha. Yeah? And if you know these Puranas, I'm using the word mythology, maybe we can find a better word, but these stories, understanding these stories will help us understand the qualities of these planets, the attributes of these planets. And just as I shared the story of the Samudra Manthan with layers of meaning, each of these stories or avatars represent certain values, certain qualities in them, which can be directly mapped to what the planet indicates. We have Saturn, which is the Kurma avatar. We have Jupiter, which is the Vamana avatar. And this is stated in the scriptures. Which planet? These are not planets. We call them as Navagrahas, Graha. Which Navagraha is associated with which avatar? Yeah. So this is what I do in my one-year program. We go into the details of these stories to understand what these planets represent and how can I use the stories to make sense of a chart. Because now, look how much easier it is to understand what Rahu and Ketu represent, because I know the origins of Rahu and Ketu in a story format. Yeah. Any questions? Because I'd like to show you what I do in the 1-year program, right? This is going to be starting in April. So before I go there, any thoughts on this interpretation or, yeah, Brinda?
Um, Vikram, why in specific to the nodes of the moon and not any other planet? I'm just curious. The Rahu and
Yeah,
Ketu, you refer to
yeah,
them as nodes of the moon and not any other planet. So I was wondering.
yes, yes, yes. So over here, you need to differentiate between astronomy and the story, mythology, the Samudra Manthan story. Yeah. Now, using the Samudra Manthan story, we can understand the qualities of Rahu and Ketu as the head and the body of an Asura, which has disguised itself. Yeah, that whole story. Now, if you take astronomy, yeah, I'll explain very simply what Rahu and Ketu represent. Yeah. So you have the earth going around the sun.
Oh, got it. Now it
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. I don't need to continue.
No, no, please. I mean, go ahead and explain it, but
Okay. All right. Just for the others, I'll just
yeah,
say this in very simple, but we'll be doing this in much more detail in the 1-year program. So the earth is going around the sun, right? It's a plane, right? The moon is going around the earth, right? In a different plane. So the two planes intersect. The plane of the moon going around the earth and the plane of the earth going around the sun. When it intersects, it creates an angle, right? That angle is Rahu and Ketu, the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon. The angle of intersection of two planes of orbits. The earth around the sun is a static plane. It doesn't change. But the orbit of the moon around the earth keeps tilting, going back and forth. That's why the angle keeps changing over here. Yeah. It's a very simple explanation, but I will show you with many other models how to visualize this, right? Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, so what we'll be doing in a longer program is looking at 4 pillars that I consider essential for astrology, for reading a chart, right? The first pillar is mythology. I'm calling mythology. You can call it Puranas, Itihasas, stories. Yeah. These stories are rich in meaning, many layers of meaning, and each story is associated with a different planet, graha. Sometimes we have stories for the signs, and these stories help us understand, experience, remember. I think that's the word. Remember what the planet stands for, what the sign stands for. And we can do an entire interpretation of a chart just using stories, just using that Dinakondu Kate, Itihasas, Puranas. You remember that first chart I showed you, Jyotish is part of the Vedanga, Puranas is somewhere else in another branch, but they're all interconnected. This will be the first pillar, right, of the 1-year program. I think we cover almost 25 stories. Yeah? The second pillar is astronomy. Yeah, we'll be learning the basics of astronomy with stargazing nights, right? We will come together. We'll decide the dates together as a group, and we will have several sessions where we learn to point the telescope at the sky, learn to identify the constellations, and look at the planets and learn to identify the planets. When we say Mars in, where's Mars now? Capricorn. What do we mean by that? What does it look like in the sky when we say Mars in Capricorn? Yeah. And these are actual photographs from the year that has completed. The other thing we'll be doing are retreats, right? And we'll be having 5 retreats. Each retreat will be for a different element: fire, earth, air, water, and space. And in the retreats, we'll be experiencing the element. In our online classes, the 1 year is online classes every week, 2 hours online. It's all theoretical knowledge. But this comes into place. You learn to experience it. You actually feel the elements when we meet together as in the retreats. Now, the year is going to be interactive, right? Many different ways of learning. Sometimes games, sometimes plays, sometimes journaling, sometimes discussions and debates. It's going to be an interactive. It's not books. I don't have books that I can share with you if you want to learn astrology, right? There is no recommended reading. There are no recommended videos to watch or websites to research. It's going to be very self-reflective. Yeah. We are going to work with your own chart, not with the charts of other people. You're going to use the chart to churn the ocean of milk. Right? See what the strengths are, what the challenges are in your chart, and how can the two come together so you can find everlasting life. Yeah. Now, these retreats will be held in places close to the temples. Each element has a temple associated with it. So we'll be visiting the temples and with a certain intention, right, associated with that element. Now, this is my personal belief that each temple stands for a certain energy, and that energy needs to be honored, right? It's not about asking the deities to help me pass my exams unless that temple is for that energy, right? So these temples that we'll be visiting are extremely sacred, many thousands of years old, all in Tamil Nadu, each associated with a different element, right? Now, the other 2 pillars are Indian philosophy. So we'll do a little bit of the Kenopanishad and we'll do the Patanjali Yoga Sutras quite exhaustively, especially what is known as the Ashtanga Marg. Right? That forms the base on which we are going to build further astrology knowledge, right? And the 4th pillar, of course, is astrology. We'll be going into the basics of astrology, right? But interconnecting all of these, mythology, astronomy, philosophy, and astrology. Yeah. So this is what I have for today, right? It's going to be a year starting from April, 2 hours per week online, 5 retreats will be in person. And those are the 4 pillars that we'll be building. And this whole thing is offered on a sliding scale, meaning there's no fixed fee. You can offer as per your financial capacity. There are more details on my website. It's allthingsvedic.in/astrology101. So this is what I had for today. It's open. I'd love to hear your thoughts, any questions, any comments, anything you want to share. Yeah, Brinda.
Vikram, just to clarify, when you say elements, you're talking about the 4 elements that you referred to in your previous webinar, right?
Yeah.
Earth, air,
Fire,
water,
water.
fire, and you said ether. You said something about ether that I'm not able to remember. Recall.
Yeah. So there are Pancha Mahabhutas, right? So there are 5 elements: fire, earth, air, water, and space. And each of them have a temple. And we'll be doing 5 retreats, 1 retreat for each element. Yeah. But the thing with astrology is that the zodiac is for the 4 elements,
Correct.
right? So we don't have a zodiacal sign associated with ether or space. The belief is that everything comes from ether and disappears into ether. So ether is the space that holds all the other 4 elements.
Got it.
Yeah. That is where astrology is concerned, right? But in other systems of, yeah, there are 5 Pancha Mahabhutas, and all 5 are honored with temples. And we'll be doing all 5.
So, I also practice acupuncture. In acupuncture, we have wood, water, metal, earth, and fire. So I'm wondering how metal fits into all this. I guess you can't really compare, but I was just.
Yeah, no, I've not studied. This is more Chinese, right? It's Oriental in its origins, and they have slightly different. They have wood and metal, but I don't know if the mapping is really, one to one. You may be a better judge.
I don't know astrology like you do, so it's
Okay.
like
Okay.
we both have different. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
You need somebody who knows both to see how they fit in. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
thank.
The Chinese system of astrology is very different.
They have astrology too.
Oh yes. Oh yes. And it's
Oh, I
part
didn't.
of a larger body of knowledge called feng shui, right? Which
Oh,
translates to Vastu Shastra, but it's
yeah.
much broader. And astrology is part of that, part of feng shui.
So they have their
Yeah.
own charts based on time of birth and place of birth and
I'm
all.
not sure how exactly they do it, but yeah, they do have a system of astrology. But then also consider it this way, that the Chinese latitudes are much north to the Indian peninsula. So the sky that you are seeing from China is going to be very different looking than the sky that you see from here. So the nakshatras that we have, for instance, may not be visible at those northern latitudes. So they do end up making their own astrology. I believe that every civilization has its own system of astrology, but I
Makes
may
sense.
be mistaken. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Vikram, this is just like a theoretical question, but so somebody in another country can't use Vedic astrology. It is very specific to geography.
It's a very good question, and that is what I've been watching very carefully. When I have clients from not other countries, but I'm more concerned with the latitude of birth, not the longitude, right? The latitude of birth. And I'm very alert when the latitude becomes extremely north or extremely south. I proceed with caution. But that's me as an astrologer, right? And the northernmost latitudes that I have worked with is something like UK or even a little bit North Europe. Yeah. And they did resonate with my readings, but the majority of my clients comes from the Indian latitudes, right? Now, nowhere has it been stated that you cannot use Vedic astrology for extremely north or extremely south latitudes. But I'm just cautious when something is extremely north or south. Yeah.
Mm. Thanks. But it is taught in the US as well, right? Like I know a lot of people there
Absolutely.
who
Absolutely. Yeah.
study. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There are several US based astrologers who are Vedic astrologers. And I have several US clients. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Abba.
So Vikram, my question is basically when you are doing a reading for a person, is it all calculation or does it require intuitive power also?
Yeah. there's a very high degree of intuition that is required.
And how do you acquire that?
That is a sadhana in itself.
Okay.
Right? So if we take the tools that we have at present to acquire knowledge, to answer a question, let's put it that way, right? I can broadly classify them as being very right-brained or very left-brained, right? You're familiar with the left and right brain analogy, right?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. So if you take science, for instance, right, and I want to predict weather, right? It's an extremely, analytical tool with no scope for intuition. Yeah. Fully mathematical. At the other extreme, we have things like tarot, or we have things like face reading, things like dowsing, right? Pendulum dowsing, where it is purely intuition. There is no scope for analysis. If you go to an extreme, right? Like pendulum dowsing, there's no scope for the mind to come into it, right? It's pure intuition.
True.
And then you have astrology. For me, it's in the center. The amount of mathematics involved in making a chart, it's insane. Yeah. And this is basically astronomy, right? We are calculating the position of a planet in its orbit as it goes around the sun, and not one planet, all the planets. And not just that, we are looking at the intersection of two planes of orbits. This is pure mathematics, right? It's pure astronomy. But then once we calculate that, we need to start to interpret it. That interpretation is where intuition is required. Yeah. So it's a combination of both. Now, when I look at software, I'm not calculating the chart manually. I know how to do that, but today I rely on software. The same birth details, two different software, they give me two different results. I need to know mathematics. I need to know my astronomy in order to say where the software is going wrong. Ultimately, the software is designed by humans. It is some programmer sitting somewhere who has designed the software. But me as an astrologer, I need to be able to say this software is making a mistake over here. Right? And for that, I need to know my fundamentals of astrology, of astronomy. Yeah. So I need to have a mathematical bent or an analytical bent in order to differentiate between two numbers and say this number cannot be right. But once I do that, I need to interpret it, and therein comes my right brain, right? Intuition. Now, your question is, how do you develop intuition? I would invite you to develop both sides, right? Not to ignore one side. We need both for astrology, right? The analytical and the intuitive. But the intuitive side, where I am at the moment, it is more about becoming a clean channel for something else to flow through me. So my sadhana is not about developing intuition, but rather about removing resistances, removing the blocks in that pipe through which that water is flowing. Right? I want to be as clean as I can for something else to speak through me. And then, yeah, if it is intuition, it's intuition. It doesn't matter. I'm just being a pipe.
Thank you. And one additional question. So when you're doing a reading, you are basically taking into consideration the name, the birth, the place, the time of the person, right? So the possibility of the time going wrong is pretty high given that it's coming from the hospitals or wherever the birth is taking place. how do we know that this is what applies to the person you are creating or reading the chart for?
Yeah. So yes, there is date, time, and place, the three variables that we need. But apart than that, I also consider the culture of the land that the person comes from and the age that this person is from. So for instance, if I'm reading Gandhi's chart, Mahatma Gandhi's chart, he lived in a different era, a different age than some like you and me, right? So I take culture and I take age, not age as in human age, but the era that the person is from. So there are 5 variables, right? But your question is about how do I know if the time of birth is correct? So there is something called birth time rectification. And this we do, it is suggested to do it in the very first session. I end up doing if I have a longer relationship with the client, where we look at events that have taken place in the life of the person, and then we triangulate, right? We say, okay, if I'm, what time should you have been born in order for these events to have taken place on these dates, right? I can move the time of birth by a couple of minutes this side or that side in order to say, okay, fine, then these events would have happened at these dates, right? It's called birth time rectification, right? There are also cases, and this I'm coming across more and more recently, where the person does not know the time of birth. There's no time. They only know the date. What do you do then, right? The time is required for certain kinds of questions. For certain kinds, I can do it without the time, with just the date. Depends on the question that they want answered. Last week, I had a case where the person did not know the date of birth. Forget the time, the date of birth, they do not know. Then we resort to a technique called Prashna Shastra. Prashna meaning question, Shastra meaning study. So the study of question. So what happens here is that we make a chart for the date, time, and place of question, not date, time, and place of birth. And the chart that we make ends up answering that question alone. It's for the question that we make the chart. And the rules are different. The way to read the chart is different. It's a branch of Vedic astrology.
Thank you.
Akotsa, you have your hand up?
Yeah. So uh, the story you have said, right? In that, you said that the two divine qualities which protect the Asura in disguise is sun and moon. How is that connected to astrology?
Huh. So the sun and moon are the two important grahas in a chart. Right? The sun indicates the identity of the person, the ego of the person, the soul of the person, the innermost nature of the person. The moon represents the mind. The moon is that which reflects the light of the soul, reflects the light of the sun, right? The mind is reflecting the light of the soul. So the moon represents the mind, the emotional mind, which governs the 5 senses, right? Not the analytical mind that calculates. That is Mercury, right? The mind that governs the senses is the moon, right? Now, the sun and moon realize the deception, right? And as the story continues, a fight ensures between the moon and Rahu. Right? All the devas, each of the devas start fighting each of the asuras. The story continues. And it's the moon that fights Rahu. Look how interesting that is, because in astronomy and in astrology, when Rahu and Ketu, when the nodes of the moon acquire the same longitude as the sun and moon, you have the eclipse. So it is Rahu and Ketu that are obstructing the sun or obstructing the moon. And we have two eclipses in an eclipse season. You have the solar eclipse and lunar eclipse, and sometimes 4 eclipses in a year. Partial sometimes, full sometimes, but you end up having 4 eclipses a year. An extremely important event where the soul is getting covered or the mind is getting covered. So the innermost self is not able to see, or the mind, the ruler of the senses, is not able to see. So when a birth happens close to the eclipses, we need to take this into account. Sun, Moon, Rahu, and Ketu. Yeah. Brinda?
Yeah, Vikram, that brings me to a question. They say when women are pregnant, they shouldn't look at an eclipse, right? They should stay away from an eclipse in a closed room and during that duration. I'm just curious, what's the rationale? How does it affect the unborn child or the mother?
So personally, I'm of the belief that nobody should look at the sun and moon during
With
an
the name.
eclipse.
Okay. Oh,
Uh,
even with glasses.
Even, yeah.
Oh,
My personal belief is, you know, the eclipse is when the sun, the soul, is getting covered, or the mind is getting covered. And these are moments when it is better to reflect on what's happening rather than to take action in the outer world. Because your mind is covered. Because the most luminous of entities in our sky is turning black. I mean, it's said to be an omen, but I mean, leave that word aside. But the sun, the giver of life, is turning black, right? Yeah. It is a time, eclipses are said to be extremely important for any reflective work rather than any externalizing work. Yeah. But just look at this. The sun, the biggest body in the solar system, and the moon, the tiniest of the Navagrahas. Right? It's even tinier than Mercury. It's the tiniest of Navagrahas, but they are placed in the sky in such a way that they are equal in size. Now, in a solar eclipse, the tiniest body is covering the largest body. The largest body, the king of all the grahas, is being covered by the tiniest body. How can you cross the king that way? See, here I'm bringing in not just astronomy, but also an interpretation. How do you interpret that event? And that is where astrology begins, right? If you stay with astronomy, then you have to look at the science behind the energies that are emanated, or it goes into a different path, right? But I'm interpreting it, and that is astrology.
so when our soul is getting covered or the mind, does that leave us vulnerable to energies around us? And energetically, is that why it's better to stay in a confined place and do more introspective work rather than go out there and
But yes, it's a yes and not a but, it's an and some scriptures say the effects of certain eclipses will last for 6 months. It depends on your chart. You know, how is that eclipse playing out in your chart? Where in your chart are the sun and moon getting obstructed? In that area, you're going to feel the effects till the next eclipse. So that's for another 6 months.
But
Yeah.
that can also change. I'm sorry, I'll let you
No,
finish.
please.
But that can change from, say, year to year, right? When you're looking at a horoscope, like,
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah,
So it's a,
absolutely.
yeah, it's a continuum, not a static.
So you were born in a certain date, time, and place, but now you and me are having a reading, and there's an eclipse coming up, or an eclipse has just happened, right? So we look at which sign that eclipse happened in your chart. And that sign will give us clues into which area of life something is obstructing the light.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, Abba.
Please excuse the background sound. Yeah, I'm staying in somebody's house. So one more question about reading and the astrology aspect. I have heard about these Agastya Nari reading and Bhrigu Sanghita Nari reading. So how is that connected? Like, what are your thoughts on it? Like, you have well researched. So I just wanted to have clarity on that. Like, I've heard few
Yeah.
people going there. So, like, what is that? Thank you.
Yeah. So Nadi astrology is supposed to be even more ancient than Vedic astrology. It's a completely different system, and I have no knowledge on Nadi astrology. I've not even been to a Nadi astrologer. I've only heard stories, and yeah, that's about it. So I won't be able to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. I see that we are close to 9:15. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, if you want to connect for anything. You can watch this on YouTube, and we'll be having more of such webinars. So stay tuned, and I hope to see you in my program. Right? So click on that link, and it'll give you all the details. Yeah, we are starting in April. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Vikram.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.